The love and compassion of Jesus and his peace. If you want to see that, you've come to the right place because John Kerry, our dear friend, is a man of faith. We know so much about him. His accomplishments and accolades could fill up an entire stat book, especially as the executive director of the Midwest Athletes for Childhood Cancer for so many years. I'm glad, John Kerry, that Homer had this vision for My Faith with Homer and Pip and our marvelous producer, Brent Young, because it is a joy to have you with us. And I'm going to kick it right over to Homer. Again, it was his vision. He always throws out the first pitch.
Everybody knows John Kerry. I mean, everybody. But no one has it documented, and everyone that knows him knows how important his faith clearly is. But nobody has it on record, documented. John Kerry, My Faith. I don't even know where it starts, how it starts. So take it away however you wish. My Faith, John Kerry.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be on this podcast or whatever we're calling it. Where did it start? I think it was last week. No, my parents. I think probably as with many people, mom and dad were. We grew up in a religious house, but it wasn't overbearing. But they did it by virtue of the example. Tuesday nights, mom would go to church at 7 o'clock for Mother Perpetual Help devotions, and we would go to in the Lent. We'd go to Stations of the Cross. Dad never missed mass. Mom never missed mass. My dad was a general practitioner on the South Side, and he would go to 6 o'clock mass on Sundays because he would then do the rounds at St. Luke's or St. Francis at 7 o'clock. And one of my favorite stories is he was at the hospital all night on January 1st, New Year's Eve. He was delivering a baby, and the baby, I guess, decided to wait a while. So he went to Our Lady Queen of Peace Church, which is at 27th and Euclid, near St. Luke's Hospital. And as he got up to go to communion, he sort of tripped on the kneeler. Now, he had been in the hospital with this woman all night. And this woman behind him goes, "If you weren't so drunk, you shouldn't even be going to church." And Dad, I'm sure, just smiled and said, "Peace be with you." But they were very, very devoted. Dad went to Notre Dame, and actually over my shoulder is his 50th year award from the University of Notre Dame. Probably came with an envelope asking him for a donation. And my mom and dad met at Loyola Medical School, where mom was the registrar and dad was a student. And so it was always there. I mean, we never minded going to church. But that's where it started. And I'm just so blessed to have had, my parents were just the best. And they had challenges. It wasn't always an easy road. Dad was drafted into the war in 1940. He was away for 5 years. Left my oldest brother Bill with my mom, and came back 5 years later. We had another brother in there, so they must have got together at least once. And but imagine in today's world being graduating from college, getting your degree in medicine, and then having a practice set up for 3 years in Sheboygan, and being taken away from all that, plus your wife, plus your child, for 5 years. He was a regimental surgeon in the Battle of the Bulge and Rhineland, sort of an unknown battle, but it really was one of the final battles of the war. Battle of the Bulge was regarded as one of the worst battles in the history of the United States. It was the first major battle fought in winter, and he was awarded the Bronze Star for valor. And like most of that Tom Brokaw named generation, he never talked about it. ever. And I'm sitting in what his part of the house. Dad lived with us the last 5 years of his life. And I'm sitting in the part of the house that we added on, which we all still call Grandpa's. He passed away about 26 years ago. And there's his first office sign, Dr. J.F. Cary, physician and surgeon. And my brother Bob, my oldest brother Bill, who was in the sports world with you guys, was sports editor in Fond du Lac. He passed away in the mid 80s. But Bob is now my oldest brother with us. And I said to Dad once, why didn't you ever become a surgeon? And he said, I cut off so much and I sewed up so much, I swore I'd never do it again. So he delivered babies and took care of women and took care of families. And was chief of staff at St. Luke's, started the emergency room at St. Luke's, but was the most understated person you'd ever know. And we're from Bayview, and no one knew Dad was a doctor. I went to school, Catholic grade school, and Dad delivered half the class, and they didn't know he was my father, which probably says something about how smart our class was. But I would make office call or house calls with him on the way to school, so I always knew who was sick, because we'd stop. So yeah, it's my mom and dad, and my brothers. My brother Bill was a great sports editor in Fond du Lac, went to Notre Dame as well. Bill went to Mass every single day. Probably one of the few sports writers that did that, sports editors up in Fond du Lac. And he would push himself up the steps of the church in Fond du Lac backwards when he wasn't able to walk as normally people would. He went to Mass up to a month before he died. And he would take the St. Joseph's Missal. Anyone who's older will remember the St. Joseph's Missal and daily Missal, and it had ribbons, and you would put the ribbons in the different parts of the thing. And he went to Notre Dame, and my brother Bob's very religious as well. They both went to Notre Dame, and so the grotto was always command performance. And no one ever preached it. They just lived it. And isn't that what we're sort of all being called to do?
So you are
what?
So you get your parents' faith, and this is my favorite question for everyone. One day
When
you
did
buy
it become your faith? I've been
Yeah,
watching.
when did you buy it, and what was that process? Was that as easy?
Yeah, I know I'm supposed to have all these crises and everything because everybody does. It was just always there. I mean, when I was in grade school, in 8th grade, instead of playing on the basketball team, because I had a hard time getting the ball over half court, I was I'm towering now at 5'5". I was probably about 4'10" then. And on Saturdays, I would go with the sisters from our church down to Old St. Mary's and teach, for some reason, a group of Puerto Rican kids to serve Mass. And it's sort of an unusual thing to do at that age. But I just, my faith was always there. I mean, I don't know exactly why, other than it's what we were sort of raised with, and I've embraced it. And one of my favorite things to do really is going to Mass. And one of the hardest things during the COVID has been to not be able to go to Mass. Like I would go 2-3 times a week down to Old St. Mary's on Broadway in Kilbourne from my office near Mayfair. And I had it timed great. And thankfully, Father Mike Hammer, I always said he nailed it when he did a good Mass. I always thought that was a cute thing to say. And Father Tim Kitsky would do a very efficient Mass. And so I just always liked it. And, I was a server in grade school and all that stuff. And I went to Marquette High. I was very fortunate to go to Marquette High. And my first 2 years, we had mandatory Mass every day. And then you had your choice, and I chose to go. And it's funny, I knew I would be doing this, and I was thinking, I knew you'd ask me that question. And even when I went to Marquette U, I was fortunate to be the manager for Coach Raymond's and Coach McGuire. And every day there'd be a 410 Mass at Schrader Hall with Father Nouse, and I would walk across campus at 4 o'clock from the old gym and go to Mass and then go back to the old gym. So it was, I don't know, it's, in my faith to me is, it's a heck of a lot more than going to Mass. It's sort of the way I try to live my life, and what we've tried to instill in our children. So it's just sort of, I don't know, it's sort of in my marrow. I don't really talk about it with people. I try to live it. Everything I've done, virtually all of my extracurricular activities beyond my job have been church related, and they still are, you know. I don't know, I just think that Christ is a pretty cool guy, and he keeps hanging around with me in some way or another. And I think my wife gets a little tired of me at times because I'll say something about God did this and God did that, and I think she's like, I wish God would open up a new account for us. But anyways, it's, you know, so that's a Jason Wilde short question, short answer.
So what is it that, we don't all get to this question, but what is it that's so important? What part of it touched you that's so good, so strong, that it has seemed almost easy for you?
I think I sort of believe that God is in everything. Not sort of believe, I believe that. And I believe that God is in us, and I believe God sees the good in us, and I believe that he's calling us. And I used to say that I would always say yes to things that the church asked me to do, whether it was in our parish or with the Archdiocese. I mean, I chaired the Catholic Stewardship Appeal for 4 years. I was on a fundraising thing with them for over a decade. I was chairman of our school board at a Catholic school, and I never really aspired to be chairman of anything. But I used to say it was a great insurance policy because, you know, when the Lord asks you to do something, I always figure it's good to say yes. But what is it? I don't know. To me, it's sort of a way of life. I mean, I pray a lot during the course of the day. Most of my prayers are gratitude, but we have 6 children and 14 grandchildren. And 6 days after the taping of this, hopefully with God's blessing, we'll have our 15th grandchild. So when you have an immediate family of 29, there's usually something to pray for, and there's a lot to be grateful for, you know. And, you know, I mean, I don't know how this is going to play when this plays back, but to have you two guys as friends, I mean, good grief, you don't think that's something to thank God for? And some of the groups that I'm involved with, you know, with the Archdiocese and with Milwaukee Catholic Home, I'm just very lucky. So what is it? I don't know. It's the way it's always been. I never really thought about it. To me, it's like, I don't know. It's like waking up. I'm just lucky to wake up. I'm not profound. I'm Catholic, so I don't read the Bible. Not even sure where our Bible is. It's someplace. And I'm not embarrassed to say that. I'm Irish as well, and back in the day in Ireland, there wasn't a lot of education for people. The priests were the smart ones, and people believed it. So I don't know. I'm not profound. I'm just consistent. And
when have you felt closest to God in your life?
Well, probably there have been a number of times, but the one that comes to mind as you said that, and I think I should probably say it, it was a Tuesday in July, probably 2014. It was a boy who I became close to. If Aaron Rodgers was here, he'd say, "Well, it's an official John Kerry thing." He cried, but young boy's name was Bo Johnson. His family owns Al Johnson's up in Door County, where the goats are on top of the roof in Sister Bay, and I knew Bo was dying, and I went to see him. I couldn't quite find him. They had moved him into another part of another hospital, and I found him, and he was asleep. And his mom was out of the room getting something, and when he woke up, he saw me. And he always called me John, which I thought was cool. Most people would call me Mr. Cary. And he looked at me, and he said, now he's 13 years old. He looked at me, and he said, "John, I hope you know how much I love you." And I said, "Well, you know how much I love you." And he goes, I don't know. I'm a little worried about dying. I'm not sure, like, if I'm good enough for heaven." And I proceeded to tell him in my august wisdom that I'm sure he was. And the funny thing is, if you ask me when I felt closest to Jesus, it would be the times I was with Bo. And that's not to take anything away from my incredible wife and our children and so many of the people that I've been around. But for some reason, Bo and another girl, Sherry Amor, I brought her communion on her birthday. She was in a coma, but Dr. Casper said I could put a tiny piece of the host under her tongue. She died the next day. And I always felt very close. So I guess I felt close a lot of times in my work with the MAC Fund, because you saw so many people that you knew were imploring the Lord, and some of them were very angry at the Lord, which I think he understood. One of the great stories is we were at a funeral of an incredible young woman who died tragically, and there's a wonderful priest in Milwaukee, Father Tim Kitsky. He's on the east side, got like 6 parishes. Just incredible. And he did this mass, and he said, "I don't like this." In other words, being at a funeral of a young person. And he said, "But I'm reminded that 20 years ago, or earlier, maybe even more than that, when I was a young priest, I was in a similar situation." And he said, "I met the Father 20 years later. And he told me, if it wasn't for what you said, I couldn't have gotten through." And Father Tim said, "Well, I'm sure it was profound, but if you could remind me of what I said." And he said, "When you meet the Lord for the first 15 minutes, you can yell at him." And that really struck a key. Because how many times have we wanted to say, why? And Father Naus was this incredible Jesuit priest at Marquette University who was probably one of our closest, if not our closest friends. When my brother died, he said, "Now that Bill is with the Lord, it answers the ultimate question, why?" Because Bill had been sick for 30 years with kidney disease. Now, it takes a lot of faith to understand that, but thankfully, I guess I have that. But I think it's a gift, and I think one of the greatest things we've given our children, in addition to 5 siblings and loving parents and all that, is our faith. And we don't preach it, we just sort of live it,
I've never asked, but I've always assumed that there's no way you could have handled and done what you did for so many years at the MAC Fund without your faith.
Oh, I think that's 100% true. The truth is, I never spoke in front of a group, not to mention being with a child, but in front of a group that I didn't say, "Lord, speak through me." And it always gave me a sense of peace. I was there almost 37 years. and I was with a number of kids shortly before they died, in many cases at the request of the parents. Um, and I've done eulogies for little kids. You just have to believe there's another, there's more. There's more than this limited time on earth, and that the opportunity to be with the Lord. Uh, yeah, so it's very real. I mean, this is sort of a funny story. I was asked to go visit a little boy, and I did. And lovely mom and dad, they weren't from this area, they were from Illinois. A lot of kids from Illinois would come up to Children's Wisconsin because it's so good, especially in kids cancer research or kids cancer stuff, and our research helped with that. Well, I went to see this little boy, and I had never, at that time, probably 35 years, never talked about the chaplaincy that Children's Hospital had, which was incredible, wonderful chaplaincy. Never talked about it. Never said to a family, would you like to pray? I thought it many times, I just never did. Well, for some reason, and I think this speaks to God's sense of humor, I said to this mom, I said, well, you know about the great chaplaincy program here. And she said, yeah. I said, well, Jim is just such a great guy. And I'm just going on and on. And as I was leaving, I said, would you like to pray? And I'd never done either. And she said, that would be wonderful. So we prayed. I learned later that both the mom and dad were rabbis, which just made me laugh. And I honestly think God was just like, this just laughing. But I said to our dear friend, Dr. Margolis, who you both know, the guy that encourages everyone to stand during the Bucks games. Of course, you can't do that now because of COVID. But he just laughed and he said, I guarantee you one thing, John, that was the best thing that happened to her that week. And I stayed in touch with the family, and it just always made me laugh, But I've always been very comfortable. I've never been uncomfortable talking about the Lord. And I'm Catholic, and we all know that there have been challenges within the church, and there still are. But the church is full of human beings, and human beings have flaws. And any organization has people that have flaws. It's a challenge, and we've lived it much more than people realize, and yet our faith is still strong.
I can't wait now to hear Tommy's questions. Come on, Tommy. You probably got 3 or 4. Take it away.
I think you answered at least 2 of them, John, from the Homer. He's got it all. I don't know if there's much more to cover, but I will ask this. I think you're a father to many, many, many young people, in addition to your beautiful family. I'm sure you agree that God put you in that spot in the MAC Fund. As Homer asked so wisely, and you answered it, how could you have done it without faith? But have there been times in that realm or any other way you have, as you say, suffered loss in your family and otherwise, where your faith has been tested?
Oh,
and how you responded to that?
Yeah, a lot. And yeah, a lot. And part of it was certainly related to the work I was blessed to do. But a lot of it was related to family. I mean, the deals that I made with the Lord at times, which I guess you're not supposed to do. But I think he understood. He was a father as well. And you just say, why? Like, why would you, there have been health issues with some of our children and all that. And a very wise man who used to wear a toupee for TV and take it off for radio, who's on this broadcast, first person ever said to me, as a parent, you're only as happy as your saddest child.
Mm.
And that or happiest child, whatever it is. And so how did you overcome it? I don't know. I guess I just kept at it. I don't know if I've gotten real angry at God, to be honest with you. I never think about it, but I do wonder when I look at some of the things both within our lives, but the things going on in the nation and in the world, and you just say, how can this be happening with an all-loving God? And I get people that ask those questions. I mean, I certainly can understand why they'd ask. If he's so good, why does he allow this? Well, I was at a funeral out at St. Anthony's in right by North Shore, the golf course in Menominee Falls. Andy Brust was a little boy who died. We named our fifth child after him. And I'll never forget the priest. He said, "Don't hate God, hate the disease, and hate the fallen human nature and the original sin that basically led to this." Now, I don't know about all the theology of all that, but it was helpful, because a 13-year-old, 12-year-old boy shouldn't die from this stuff. Bo Johnson should be in college. Sherry Amor should be a physician assistant, which is what she wanted to do. But then Brandon Novak is up in Sheboygan Falls, and he was diagnosed when he was 12. He's now a father. So there's a lot of good too, but a lot of challenges. But I think that all that you've done to try to build up that relationship, and it's a relationship with God. I don't say my Lord and Savior like I see people say all the time. I sort of try to live it, but he knows how important he is in my life and in our life. The other thing that I'm just so lucky, I mean, you both know my wife. I mean, good grief. Talk about marrying up. I mean, I define that. She went to Marquette and she got a degree in nursing with Bachelor of Science, and I got a Marquette-like degree in broadcasting. I mean, but we both can say we went to Marquette. So yeah, there've been a lot of challenges, and I tend to focus more on, I guess you'd say, the positive things. But when you're a father of as many kids as we have, you've got to look for the positive. There's an incredible pediatrician in town, Ed Montgomery. He was pediatrician in chief at Children's, and he was our pediatrician. And he said, you should always try to find something positive to say. And he said, if your son comes home with D's on a report card, you say, it took a lot of courage to bring that report card home. And we brag about the fact that we had a 4.0 at Marquette High. We had two boys there, and one had a 1.9 and the other had a 2.1. And if you add it together, it's a 4.0. I won't say which had which, because they both argue over who had the 1.9. But I don't know. To me, it's a joyful life, and God just brings that joy in the people that we're blessed to be around. I probably sound like I don't know what I sound like, but I talk too much. So
now I'm stealing this from Terrell Buckley, and he said one of his slides was, "You got to start somewhere. You got to," and that would be my question to you, to people that you meet, given your life and your faith. What would you say to others? What would you suggest to them to get or feel possibly the way you do?
You know what, you mentioned Terrell, I'll mention Gino DeLuca, who I watched his thing. He said, basically, my recollection was, just give it a try. Find something good that you see, something good, and give it a try, and in a sense, wonder where that comes from. And I would say, just, give it a try. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge with everybody. And I really think just we, in a sense, can answer that by witnessing what we think, in a sense, he wants us to do. And so I would say, just try it. I mean, I can't imagine life without faith. How many times have we said, probably, I know I say it, and I would think perhaps you guys do, what do people do that don't have faith? Like if they don't have that higher being, whatever that is in their world, because human beings, we let each other down all the time, even though we don't really intend to. I mean, what percentage of marriages, we're going to be married 47 years in August. I mean, that's incredible when you think about it. And I can't tell you how many times we've gone to, I mean, I watched my brother die by inches. My brother was diagnosed when I was 6 years old. I never knew, I don't remember life without Bill being sick. And it was chronic, and it wasn't all the time. And he wouldn't want me to make him into this martyr kind of person. But all family functions were, how's Bill? And I just felt so lucky. I said to him 10 days before he died, and he'd been sick for 30 years. He had 2 kidney transplants. He was at Mass every day. And I said to him, did you ever ask why? 10 days before he died. And he said, it's funny you say that. I did last week. And my brother would occasionally use the King's language. And he said, I got so blankety blank at myself. I thought, who the blank are you to ask God anything? You talk about faith. And you talk about commitment. And I said to him, it's just not fair, Bill. I said, you've gone through so much, dialysis for 2 years, and kidney disease is a horrible disease because you're basically kept alive by a machine with dialysis. And I said, you've gone through so much and I haven't had anything. You know what he said to me? He goes, well, you got those allergies. I swear to God, that's what he said. And in his mind, but so how can you have those kinds of people around you? I mean, my brother Bob graduates from Notre Dame, 1965, and goes in the Peace Corps for 2 years. How many people do that kind of stuff? And this is like my brother Tom's, the one I mentioned to you earlier that watches the Mass. He's a disabled Vietnam vet living at the VA. And so when you've been surrounded by that, in your core, and then you've been fortunate to get a Jesuit education and the School Sisters of Notre Dame for, grade school. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. And then you marry a person who, I say to her all the time, well, you could have married a doctor, and, she seems, we're still together.
Well, Tommy claims that I give nicknames and do everything, or a t-shirt. Well, I got one because I know this is all I'll ever hear. John, I want his faith, Cary.
I don't know. You know what? When you ask me to do this, I'm just like, what would anyone care? It's sort of like Facebook. Like, who cares what you had for dinner last night? And who cares but you know what? I think people sort of get a kick out of it. It's sort of like a community kind of thing. And you know what? If there's people out there that are sort of wondering, one of my favorite, and I'll shut up after this, but one of my favorite stories was, we named Andy after the boy I talked about earlier, and after Andy Boggs. And Andy Boggs was 23 years old, and he got a brain tumor, and he died. And I was blessed to meet him. And they asked me to do his eulogy. And the next day, Terry Mewson used to be on TMJ Radio. That's a Good Karma brand company now. So can we say that? I don't know. We're supposed to. Well, I guess I already did. Terry had a great show on TMJ, and she asked me to come on and talk about Andy Boggs, because he was a musician and she knew of his music and things like that. And I did. And I'd been in 2 meetings before that, and I hadn't prepared. Like I said before, about Lord, speak through me. and I was running late, and I got in the studio just as basically they were going on the air. And Terry played the opening song was one that Andy wrote, "Why Do the Children Die?" It's a very uplifting song. And then she started talking, and we both know Terry, and she's an incredibly special person. And I started to talk, and this will shock you. I started to cry. And this is live radio, and you're not supposed to have dead air, I guess, as a broadcasting major. So I learned that in B-roll. They still say B-roll. And there was dead air. And it was probably only like 5 seconds, but it seemed forever. And when it ended, when I sort of composed myself, I said, I'm not going to apologize. I said, I regret if I made you feel uncomfortable, but I said, Andy deserves that emotion. And then I talked about Andy. And I just told stories about him. And I walked out of the station, and Dolly was the receptionist at that time, lovely woman. And that was in the days before 9/11, so there weren't, bulletproof glass around the reception area and TV stations and radio stations. And she said, John, what did you say? I said, I don't know. I said, you know me, I just talked. She said, John, the phone has not stopped ringing. So I get in the car, and I kept the station on. And somebody calls with cystic fibrosis, which is a horrible disease. And she said, I was going to take my life today. But when I listened to all that Andy had been through and the fact that he kept going, I decided not to. And I think that's God. And I think that's him working through us. Like I think You're My Faiths are him working through us. And the proverbial shepherd that goes after one sheep, or the proverbial if you save one person, whatever that kind of stuff is, then I think it's worth it. But imagine that this woman was going to take her life. And by virtue of what I did talking about this wonderful young man, something touched her. And I think that was the Lord tapping her on the shoulder and saying, I'm here. I'm always with you. And I love you no matter who you are. And, that's sort of comforting, I think. We just have to believe it. That's it.
That's the end.
Yeah.
I dare Tommy to add to that.
I will. We can edit it out. This is my last one. I take issue with you for the first time in the 40 years I think I've known you being in town, John Kerry. Your faith story is important, and it is touching people now. It has obviously touched us. I started with it, and I'll end with it. Love, compassion, peace coming from Jesus through you as a vessel. Please speak to the person out there who may be desperate, as that individual was, and says, this sounds fine for John, but I just can't get there. I want to try. What would you leave that individual with, John, please?
I would say try. I would just say, maybe just say that goof that was on this internet thing said I should try. And you know what, Lord? The line that I've always gone by is the prayers the Lord hears first are the ones we can't pray, because he knows everything that we're thinking. And I always found that to be very helpful. And I would just say, give it a shot. What do you got to lose? I mean, I think faith is a gift, and I think it's a blessing. I think it's there for everyone. We just have to open it. And sometimes I think we're too wrapped up in ourselves and in our humanity to do that. But if you put yourself in a humble role, in a servant role, whether it's servant leadership or just acting as a servant, I mean, God hears those prayers. He knows that person that's hurting right now, and he's trying to help them, but it's a two-way communication. You know, when your phone rings, you don't have to answer. That's an invitation. You don't have to pick up the phone or push the button, whatever it is nowadays. God is always there. I think he wants us to push the button. I think he wants us to take the call. So to that person that doesn't get it, just say, well, guy seems like a decent guy. Maybe I should try it. And maybe you just say, and you don't have to be in a church. You don't have to be on your knees. You don't have to be, you just say, Lord, I really need your help. What did Don Kogis's wife say when she said, you Catholics, you Catholics, you Catholics? And what did she say after that weekend? She got it. There was an intercession. And I think that there's intercessions all the time. And that's what, and you're going to edit this part out, I'm sure Brent can with his dog in the background. But that's what you guys are doing. You may say to yourself, you know, I've been in broadcasting, and what lives have I touched? Much more than you realize. The consistency of being there. You know, we share a mutual friend in Bob Dolan. And one time he called me before he was signing a contract, and he said, I don't feel like I'm doing anything. I said, you know, Bob, people wake up with you in the morning, and you're a sign that there's another day, and they feel comfortable with you. And I look at what you guys do, and I think you've touched people. When Mom died, she'd have a Manhattan at 4:00, and she'd watch John McCullough, great broadcaster who you worked with, Tom, on Channel 4. She'd watch him at 5:00. So she'd have a Manhattan at 4 and John McCullough at 5. Well, I called him when she died. And I sort of knew him, but I didn't. He acted like he knew me, which was nice. And I said, I just want you to know that a dear viewer of yours passed away. And she would have a Manhattan at 4 and John McCullough at 5. And there was no sound on the other end of the phone. And I said, John, are you there? And he said, yeah. He said, you know, you sit in the studio and you look into that piece of glass and that red light goes on and you wonder, does anyone care? What am I doing? And he said, I can't thank you enough for telling me that. I thought that was pretty cool. That a guy, especially a guy of his character and clout, went to see my dad died on a Thursday. Wednesday morning, we go to see him. He had moved into intensive care at St. Luke's, the hospital where he was chief of staff. You know the first thing he said to me? How'd the Brewers do last night? He said, I was listening to Uke and I fell asleep. You're both in sports. You're refired in another way now, Tom. But Homer, you're refired through this as well. How great is that? And I called Uke and I told him that, or I told Mary Burns, who told him, because you can't get through to Uke unless you're you guys. But I just thought it was so cool. He literally said, how'd the Brewers do last night? I fell asleep listening to Uke. Mary was a home hospice nurse, and she would go into homes, obviously. And she went into a home on the south side of Milwaukee, a Hispanic family. And there was this old man who was her patient. And under his pillow was his transistor radio because he listened to Uke and the Brewers. Pretty cool. And that's,
So
Uke probably doesn't even realize how he touched people. How many times have we heard people say to Eddie Doucette, I had a transistor radio under my pillow and I listened to all the games. All the parents knew the kids were doing it, but the kids thought they were getting away with something. Everyone, whenever I've been with Eddie and everybody said it. I don't care who they were. And that's what you're using, that voice, that megaphone, this medium that, you know, thankfully, you know, Brent's there to put it all together to share a message. And just by the way you guys live your lives. And I know all this isn't going to air, which is fine. But it's important that you hear it too, because too often we stand at a casket and we say the things we should have said. I try to say them in person because I don't want anyone to ever wonder how much did you love me. You know, and once in a while when I hang up with Homer, I say that, and I know it's awkward for people. It's not for me because it's the truth. But all we are vessels of the Lord, because He wants to say it all the time. So when you say to somebody, "I love you," basically, I think to some degree you're saying that God's saying, "I love you," and that's not a bad thing. Well, most of this is probably going to hit the floor or whatever it hits nowadays with digital, but it's been fun.
Tommy, you're right. There was more there. Might be over now. We got another question. It keeps getting better. I'm not up anymore.
I just want to hang out with him all day, but we can't because John, more than ever, and I've used this before, but it's true, as a vessel, you allow the light of Jesus to shine through you and his love to flow through you. And so you've touched me and anybody blessed to know you with your faith story and your humility. And you've done it here again on My Faith with Homer and Pip. So we have great gratitude for you, my friend. God bless you and the Cary family. And thanks for being on with us.
My wonderful Irish Catholic mother, her favorite line was, "God bless you always and always." And I've shared that, and I've been fortunate to be with some different boards and stuff. And amazing, then in all seriousness, the number of people that say, "Oh, I love that. I'm going to use that." So God bless you always and always.
Thank you so much. That's a great place to end. Thank you again, John Cary on My Faith with Homer and Pip. We know you've been touched. If you know of someone who has a faith story, perhaps it's yourself, just to touch one person. That's Homer's vision, and that's why I'm so very thankful for him as a dear, dear friend. And this man, John Cary, and of course, our producer, Brent Young. I'm Tom Pippins. Thanks, everybody, and God bless you always and always. Thanks, John.
Thank you.